You and I and everybody at some point experiences the paralysis of guilt feelings and self-criticism. Now, if you find yourself caught in that right now, I'm going to show you a very effective way to begin to work through that guilt feeling, to resolve the self-criticism, and ultimately to find more and more progress toward the things that genuinely matter to you. Now, at the outset, it's very important to understand that there is a world of difference between feelings that arise from thoughts and feelings that arise from experience. Ultimately, guilt feelings arise from a thought along the lines of, I should, whatever the case is. Now, let's say you are an entrepreneur and you have fallen short of your desired profit goals for the last month, the last year, however long. Or maybe you find that you are in a conflict with your spouse and you said something you wish you hadn't have said. Inevitably, there's going to be a thought, something along the lines of, I should have blank, or I shouldn't have blank. This is a thought that evokes any number of feelings. Now, you can verify this for yourself. When you think that thought, I should have or I shouldn't have, whatever, what do you feel? Probably bad, right? This is where the self-criticism comes in rampantly. So, again, I want to iterate that there is a world of difference between feelings that arise from thoughts and feelings that arise from experience. So the guilt feelings of I should have done this situate you somewhere other than the reality of here and now. So you can think about this as a fork in the road. You can explore the constructed world of make-believe that says, oh, reality should be something other than what reality is. I should have done this. I shouldn't have done that. That's all well and good, but that's not the reality of your here and now experience. That is a thought about reality. It should be something other than what it is. And you then succumb to all of the feelings generated by your thoughts. These are ultimately a distraction from or a defense against something that is difficult to tolerate in the reality of your here and now experience. Now, I often find that when I'm working with clients and they can recognize these should thoughts and the guilty feelings that come from them, when they bring themselves back to present reality, there are usually two things that occur. When we go looking for how do you feel about the fact that reality is something other than what you'd like it to be, one of two things occur quite often. The first is that they'll say, well, I feel regret. And this is an interesting one because regret isn't quite a feeling. Regret is a verb. It's something that you do. And curiously enough, if you look to the etymological roots of the word regret, it means something like to weep again. Curiously enough, there's a dog weeping outside the door. I don't know if you can hear that sweet little pup, but I'll carry on despite. So regret means to weep again. And this gives us some sense of what the feeling might be about the facts of the situation. The facts of the situation are reality is something different than what you would like it to be. How do you feel about those facts? One thing you might feel is grief. And when people feel regret, quite often this covers over the very difficult feeling of grief, sadness, sorrow. The other thing that often occurs is that when people connect with the feeling about the fact that reality is something they think it shouldn't be, they become frustrated. And frustration is another very interesting emotional experience for us. Quite often, frustration comes along with anxiety, which is to say, worry about being frustrated. It comes along with tension, where you bind up the experience of frustration, or it comes along with irritability, where we have a kind of natural inclination to retaliate against the thing that is frustrating. So, what I want to suggest is that if you can set aside the thoughts about the situation, you're no longer subject to the feelings that come from those thoughts, the guilt feelings. Oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. That lets you connect with the feeling of the experience itself. The experience being that reality is something other than what you would like reality to be. What I often find, and again, I don't know your situation right now. Obviously, we're not working through this directly. What I often find when guiding clients through this process is that these guilt feelings distract from and defend against either the experience of grief, which gets covered over in the word regret, meaning to weep again, or the experience of frustration. Now, these are two very difficult emotional experiences for us. We don't have a whole lot of good models for how to manage and move through the experience of grief and the experience of frustration. Grief, if we start there, let's say that perhaps you grieve the fact that reality is different than what you'd like it to be. Maybe, I know I came across an example of this myself recently. You recognize that there has been a tremendous loss of time. Grief signals that we have lost something of value. So if you can connect with the underlying experience of grief, this can be a signal of sorts. It can be a clue to guide you toward what you value. And ultimately, when it comes to grief, grieving, sorrow, sadness, the impulse of these emotional experiences is to mourn, to weep, to cry. And look, that can be very difficult. Ultimately, it's only made more difficult by the things we think about our grief. So, for example, if I am telling myself, well, I shouldn't be so sad, I should be more grateful. Again, you can hear that we just slip right into the guilt-ridden feelings. I don't want to feel sorry for myself. It's quite common too. We might say that feeling sorry for oneself is the onset of genuine sorrow, which could lead us to grieve. Grief is ultimately a fairly clean process. It knows what it wants, and it will ask for what it wants, whether or not we are willing to attend to it and care for it well. That's a whole other situation. So that gives us a little bit of a survey of grief, which so often underlies these guilty feelings in response to thoughts. I mentioned that the other common situation is that people connect with frustration. Now, frustration is inevitable. It's a part of life. Frustration occurs when there is something between us and what we want. So let's say you are critical of yourself. You should be farther along in your career. You should be a better partner or parent, whatever the case is. Again, we can set aside and divest from the thoughts about our experience, the commentary on our experience, and the feelings that come along from those thoughts. And we can connect with the experience itself. And let's say that there are times where it is frustrating that there's a gap between where we are and where we'd like to be. That, by definition, is frustrating. Now, I mentioned before that frustration often comes along with anxiety, with tension, with irritability. And these, quite often, are defenses against the experience of frustration. Now, I don't have time in this particular video to get into how to deal with anxiety, how to deal with tension, how to deal with irritability. If you're curious, let me know, reach out. We can work through that fairly quickly, actually. But the experience of frustration itself, undefended, undistracted, is actually more like a kind of pleasant state of arousal, alertness, readiness. I often liken it when working with clients to, you may have seen the old cartoon Dragon Ball Z, where the characters, they kind of power up. They get the little energy cloud glowing around them. Their hair changes color and they unlock a new level of ability. That's a bit like what frustration is. Again, when you are not binding frustration with anxiety, tension, or succumbing to irritability, if you can distinguish these experiences, it lets you access a kind of potential energy of frustration. You begin to power up in a way, and that actually does make you more capable in the present moment. When there's a gap between where you are and where you'd like to be, between reality as it is and reality as you would like it, that's frustrating. Now, what you then do with that gap ultimately comes down to how you manage and contain and harness the energy of frustration. If you can power up through frustration and contain the energy, you can then direct it toward the fulfillment of your goals. You can direct it toward means whereby you could close the gap between reality as it is and reality as you would like it to be. So ultimately, this gives us a sense of the temporality of guilt feelings and self-criticism. Quite often, the difference comes down to, am I succumbing to reminiscences about the past, which maybe does deserve your grief, your mourning. Maybe that actually does occasion your sorrow, your sadness. Or is this guilt and self-criticism more related to an orientation toward futurity, the way that you would like reality to be in some future state? Ultimately, the concept of emotional mastery comes down to how we relate to our experience in the present, in service to the fulfillment of our values. And what I find over and over and over again is that when clients develop these psychological skills, when they're able to distinguish between feelings that arise from thoughts and feelings that arise from experience, when they're able to distinguish between thoughts and feelings, and when they're able to connect with the reality of their emotional experience, it gives them access to both energy and information that they wouldn't have available otherwise. And when you can connect with this energy and you can connect with this information, it makes you much more capable of taking reality-based action toward the fulfillment of your values. And when I'm working with clients, ultimately what we're looking to do is give them access to deeper presence and next level performance in their work. So they can be present as a partner and a parent. They can perform at their best in the workplace. And when the job is done, be done with it and go on and live their lives. So if that is of interest to you, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel to learn more. Feel free to reach out as well if you're curious about what it would like to work together to develop these skills. And for the time being, I would love to know in the comments below what you think of this. Does this bring up any questions? Does this remind you of experiences in your own life? And with that, I will bid you adieu